Thank you for joining us for our second presentation in our Getting Smarter About Getting Older series. My name is Lisa Goldberg, and I'm the Executive Director of At Home on the Sound. We hope you were able to watch our presentation by Dr. Robert Waldinger on November 4th. We appreciate the many positive comments and feedback we received. We know you will enjoy this evening's presentation by Rabbi Geller. So much of what Dr. Waldinger and Rabbi Geller speak about is reflective of the wonderful opportunities At Home on the Sound provides. Through this series, we hope to engage you, raise interesting questions, spark conversation, and introduce you to the many ways you can volunteer, make friends, find support, and proactively enhance your life. I'm thrilled to introduce Simon Marlow, the curator of our Getting Smarter About Getting Older program. Simon?
Thanks, Lisa. Rabbi Geller is an inspiration. She's a pathfinder with grace and diplomacy, an activist that has always believed in the wisdom of female leadership. A graduate of Brown University, she became one of the first women to ever be ordained as a rabbi. And at 44, she became the senior rabbi of Temple Emmanuel, Beverly Hills, that today has more than 1,000 members. PBS Next Avenue has identified her as a visionary on aging in America. Newsweek has identified her as one of the most influential rabbis in this country. She's an acclaimed author that speaks truth to power. I'm proud to say that Laura Geller's book that she wrote with her husband, Richard Siegel, has been the inspiration for our series. For those of you who saw Professor Waldinger, he established broad parameters for living a good life. Rabbi Geller identifies constructive steps forward. She defines a whole new phase of life between retirement and frail old age. And she's created her own version of the village concept in LA that closely parallels much of what At Home on the Sound has created for our own community in Larchmont and Mamaroneck. Please welcome Rabbi Geller.
It's a delight to be with all of you today. I really want to thank Simon and all of you at Home on the Sound for inviting me and letting us have this conversation together. There's a verse in the book of Psalms that has become increasingly important to me. Min hametzer karati ya, anani b'merchavya. From the narrow place I call out to God, who answers me with expansive possibilities. We have all been in a narrow place. The pandemic, the fear, the isolation, even the Zoom calls. A narrow place that's both collective and personal. And for me, the Psalm verse is a reminder that in some ways, this stage of my life can feel like a narrow place. I'm 71 years old, a boomer. Social science research says that my cohort is living 31 years longer than our grandparents did. 31 years, not tacked on to the end of our life, but just after the middle. It's a new stage between midlife, when we built our careers and our families, and frail old age. I not only want to live longer, I want to live better. I don't want this stage to be a narrow place. What is the narrow place? Ageism, that last socially sanctioned prejudice. We all know it because we've experienced it. Discrimination in the workplace, the feeling of invisibility in stores or in restaurants, those Hallmark cards. And even worse is internalized ageism, accepting the stereotypes that old people are incompetent, or our own reluctance, even in midlife, to admit that we're aging, or that we might need help in certain situations. Or the idea that older people are other, not us, not even future us. The narrow place is 60 is the new 40. 70 is the new 50. It's just a way to deny we're getting older. Ironically, the pandemic made it harder for us to deny we're getting older because suddenly anyone older than 60 was vulnerable. We can't pretend anymore. The narrow place. What am I? What words do I use to describe myself? Retired? Yes, but I'm still engaged in projects that matter to me. Senior? Well, I do like that movies are less expensive. Do you remember movies when we used to be able to go to movies? But senior, I don't really like the word. Elder sounds too old or maybe too pretentious. So what do I call my cohort? The Encore generation? The third chapter? Perennials? I like that one. Or just plain boomers. Boomers maybe, but technically, boomers are those born between 1946 and 1964. And it really isn't just about those who inhabit this stage now, because someday my millennial children will be between midlife and frail old age. So we're not naming a generation, but rather we're initiating a new stage in the life cycle, a stage that never existed before. And perhaps the conversation shouldn't be about chronological age, but what social scientists call functional age, describing how a person functions in daily life. In this new stage, some of us are empty nesters. Some of us are retired, some still working. Some are the panini generation, squished between our aging parents and millennial children who still need our attention. Some of us are grandparents. Some of us have never had children, or our relationship with our adult children and grandchildren isn't what we wish it might be. Some of us have partners. Others are alone. They're called in the literature now solo agers. Some of us are straight, some LGBTQ. All of us are differently abled. Some of us have communities we cherish, others don't. Some of us like to travel when traveling was safe. Some of us have explored encore careers. What we have in common is that there is less time ahead than there was behind. End the question. Now that more years have been added to our lives, how do we add more life to our years? Yes, there is a narrow place, but we don't have to stay there. The challenge is to transform a paradigm of decline into one of expansiveness, opportunity, and an invitation to growth. When I was 62 and beginning to think about my own retirement, I noticed that a huge percentage of my congregants were boomers, and many of them were leaving the congregation. That observation led to a listening campaign facilitated by congregants. We talked with over 250 congregants in intimate house meetings, and we asked people how they feel about this stage of life, between maturity, the building of families and careers, and frail old age. These conversations were incredibly moving, particularly for the men. For many of them, this was the first time they spoke publicly about their fears and concerns about growing older. The women were more comfortable talking about feelings. And there were 4 fears that kept coming up. First, becoming invisible. Who am I when I'm no longer the senior rabbi of Temple Emmanuel of Beverly Hills? Second, being isolated. My social capital is shrinking. Fewer people return my calls or emails these days. My friendship network is getting smaller. The third fear, being without purpose. What will I do all day? And the fourth fear, becoming dependent. God forbid I should ever be dependent, especially on my children. People shared questions. How do I navigate changing relationships with older parents, millennial children, intimate partners, and friends? How do I nurture long-term connections? How do I let go of toxic friendships? How do I make new friends? And as friends move away, kids too, with whom do I want to grow old? And in what kind of settings? Do I want to move to be near my kids? Or to a retirement facility? Or maybe co-housing? The majority of my congregants wanted to age in place, to stay in the homes they loved. They asked, if I want to stay in my home, what changes do I need to make? Not only physically in my home, but also in my community, with my neighbors, and also in my synagogue, to help me with the resources that I need to make it possible to stay. Like, for instance, transportation when I can no longer drive. Those questions led us to explore the village movement. I'll say more about that towards the end of my talk. There were other questions. How do I deal with illness, my own or that of my friends? People talked about the organ recital. That is, when folks get together and talk about what's wrong with each of their organs. Most agreed that that conversation should be limited to only 5 minutes of any kind of social gathering. And while it's true that many people have dealt with illness at other stages in their lives, everybody acknowledges that there's more as we get older. How do we deal with the changes in our bodies when we still carry the image of ourselves as young in our heads? One woman said, every time I pass a mirror, I'm surprised to see my mother. What's she doing there? When did I get this old? And questions like, how can I be a good friend to a friend who's sick? And what's the self-care I need to pay attention to, especially now at this stage of my life? Other questions. What do I need to do to get ready for the inevitable? How do I have those end-of-life conversations with my adult kids when they don't want to have them? And if I don't have kids, with whom do I have them? The majority of my congregants had end-of-life directives, but only a very small percentage of them had ever shared them with their adult children or the people who would be there at that moment to carry out their wishes. Like the other clergy in this conversation, I have sat in too many hospital rooms when a beloved or maybe not so beloved mom or dad was no longer able to articulate their wishes, and adult children couldn't agree on what should happen. Conflicts like that lead to years of heartbreak and family dysfunction, and it could so easily be avoided if those difficult conversations had happened. Then there was a lot of conversation around purpose. What will give meaning to my life now that I no longer work full-time? How can I find a volunteer or paid position to which I can bring my experience, my talent, and my passion? And finally, how do I think about my legacy? How do I want to be remembered? It was that listening campaign that led my late husband, Richard Siegel, and I to write the book, Getting Good at Getting Older. The book is a kind of toolkit which focuses on all the issues we're dealing with at this stage of our lives. I'm going to hold it up so you can all see it. It's not a sermon about living life to the fullest. And it's not a book you read from cover to cover. It's a book you pick up as you navigate changing relationships, as you think about with whom you want to grow old and how. There are tools in it to help you explore the different ways you can create meaning and purpose in this stage, through volunteer work, political engagement, and encore careers. And there are tools that will help you with those difficult end-of-life conversations. And there are tools for getting good at giving away, how to leave a legacy, not a landfill, and what to do with the sad reality that our kids don't want our stuff. This is actually a huge problem for many of us in this age cohort. I've learned a lot since writing the book which came out before the pandemic. First, I've learned how real the epidemic of loneliness is, and how hard it is to deal with the truth that many of us, like so many others at other stages of their lives, are lonely. Experts tell us that social connection and the quality of relationships are predictors of physical health, longevity, and quality of life, and that loneliness can increase the risk of premature death by 30%, making it as risky as obesity and as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Turns out that the profound effects of loneliness on health and independence are a critical public health problem. It's now considered to be an epidemic. This was true before the pandemic, and it's only been exacerbated by the isolation that so many of us have experienced. A second thing I learned is how important friends are as we get older. Betty Friedan, in 1993, wrote a book called The Fountain of Age. She was actually one of the first people to begin to think about this stage as a new stage. Here's what she wrote. More and more, psychologists have found that for older persons, loneliness is not necessarily linked to the death of a spouse or to how infrequently they see their children or grandchildren, but to the absence of personal relationships with peers, with friends of their own age or any age who share their interests and with whom they sustain their roots of shared experience. It's a pretty astonishing statement. Friends of our own age, or friends of any age, raises the question, how do we nurture an intergenerational community? Jews often speak about l'dor vador, from generation to generation. The assumption is that we have wisdom and we're going to pass it on to the younger generation, which is true, but it's not the whole truth. We really should be talking about dor im dor, generations with generations, with the understanding that each generation has something important to teach another generation. Synagogues and churches are one of the only intergenerational institutions that still exist. How can we create real connections? There's beginning to be talk now, both in the faith community world and also in the secular world, about co-generations, about different generations getting together, not for the purpose of getting to know each other, but for the purpose of working together around issues that we all care about. If we were to do that, we would not only make a difference in the world, but the relationships that would develop between and among these different generations could actually be transformative. The third thing I've learned is the importance of having a purpose. This is the stage of life that social psychologist Erik Erikson described as generativity, when the dominant motivation of our lives begins to shift from accumulating for ourselves, money, things, personal experiences, to giving back, to reinvigorating our natural inclination to do good for others. This generativity surge is not only good for our society, but it can also be good for us personally. Research shows that people who score high on measures of generativity tend to report higher levels of happiness and well-being compared to people who score low. High generativity is also associated with lower levels of depression. Everybody needs one adult who is crazy about them. For some of us, that one adult was a grandparent. Some of us are lucky enough to be grandparents to our grandkids. And still more of us could be surrogate grandparents to other children and young adults, or mentors to young millennials. Turns out that being engaged in this way is good for us as well as the young people we touch. An important finding from the Harvard Study of Adult Development, which has been tracking more than 700 men from a wide variety of backgrounds since 1938, is that those in this age and beyond who invest in caring for and supporting the next generation are 3 times as likely to be happy as those who don't. The fourth thing I learned is that our religious traditions really do have wisdom as we negotiate this stage. In Judaism, for example, there's a spiritual practice of character development on how to actually cultivate those character traits to help us become the 85-year-old, the 90-year-old that we someday hope to be. Some of those character traits are forgiveness, gratitude, and equanimity. They're like muscles. You need to exercise them. You need to do work on yourself now in order to be that vision of a person that you want to become. What do you need to do to acquire wisdom? And religious communities, and now increasingly our secular culture, is paying attention to the importance of ritual. It's interesting that Jewish tradition, like other faiths, is full of ritual for the early stages of our lives. A covenant ceremony for girls, a brit milah for boys, a bat or bar mitzvah, a confirmation, marriage, for some of us, divorce. But then what comes next? What is the next traditional life cycle ritual after your marriage? The answer is your funeral. Ironic, isn't it? Because with luck, I'll probably live more years between my marriage and my funeral than between my birth and my first marriage. Jewish tradition teaches us that divinity, however we experience it, is present at all times. We just have to notice it. In fact, our ancient rabbis taught us that we should say 100 blessings a day. We should stop 100 times a day and we should say, wow, before we eat, after we eat, when we see an ocean. There are 100 different times that we stop and say, wow. My question is, what are those moments in this stage of our life? This stage, this new stage? How do we notice the divinity, the loss, and the joy that's present at this stage? What would be those moments? A major birthday? Becoming a grandparent? Retirement? You think about retirement as a kind of secular experience, but it's really a profoundly spiritual experience of transition and of imagining what this next stage is going to be like. Taking off a wedding ring after the death of a spouse, that was really an important moment for me. Renewing marriage vows, leaving the home where you raised your children. The fifth thing I learned is the importance of technology to keep us connected. This was really clear, as you all know, through the pandemic, when technology was both a lifeline, but also a challenge. What role will technology play in a new normal? How will our institutions, including our synagogues, our churches, and our villages like at home on the Sound, be changed as we incorporate new ways to use and to think about technology. So I want to go back to our listening campaign and how it led to our village, Chai Village, LA. Through the listening campaign, we discovered, as I said, that the majority of congregants want to age in place. That led us to do research, and we discovered the village movement, which, as you know, began with Beacon Hill in Boston, when neighbors got together to figure out how they could age in the homes they love. Now there are over 200 villages around the country, yours is one, and 200 more in formation. It's an old concept, neighbors helping neighbors. I can stay in my house until I can't climb a ladder to change a light bulb anymore, unless I have a neighbor who can do that for me. When we discovered the village movement, we thought the idea of a village would be a perfect project for our synagogue, in partnership with a nearby Reform synagogue. So we launched Chai Village, LA, the first synagogue-based village in the country. Our mission statement: we are not a place, we are a community led by adults who share their optimism, skills, support, and expertise with each other to joyfully navigate the next steps in our lives. And since part of our agenda, different from yours, was to strengthen the synagogue, we required that people who wanted to join the village would need to be affiliated with one of the two synagogues. To our delight, people who would have left the synagogue because they felt the focus was only on families and young children, those folks have stayed, and others have actually joined the congregations to be part of the village. It's been an amazing win-win all around. We thought people would join the village because they would want to get or to give services, to help each other out or to be helped out. But we discovered instead that what people really wanted was social connections. Social connections. As our social networks shrink, we lose social capital. We no longer have the work colleagues we once had. Old friends move away or die. Turns out that people need new friends. Who knew that the senior rabbi of Temple Emmanuel would ever need new friends? But the truth is, I really do. People want to have buddies to take walks with, to play cards with, to explore the city with, to talk about films, books, gardening, to do social justice projects together. Our village is, like yours, I'm sure, member-led and member-driven. Members share their experience, their expertise, and their passion with each other, offering classes, leading groups. And because of our work together, we're all coming to realize that while we fear becoming dependent, nobody is ever really independent. All of our lives, we have moved between dependence and independence. The trick is to create a nurturing, life-affirming interdependence. And now, the blessing. May each of you hear the invitation at this stage of your life, and may we become that blessing for ourselves, for our whole community, and for the larger world. Thank you.
That was really beautiful, Rabbi Geller. Thank you for sharing your insights and sharing your perspectives. You really are a pathfinder, and certainly you're an inspiration. Thank you also for sharing your journey in creating your own Aging in Place initiative, much like our At Home on the Sound. At Home on the Sound is in its 11th year of helping, supporting, and guiding people, those who chose to live well in their own homes. We share our accumulated wisdom on what makes for a good life. And we do this, like you, with an extensive array of programs that stimulate the mind and encourage social engagement in a warm, supportive environment. And for those who need it, we also provide an array of services like transportation. And now, Rabbi Geller, we have a few specific questions from some of the leaders in our community of Larchmont and Marinette. Reverend Lisa Mason.
Rabbi Geller, what a complete treat, gift, and blessing this time with you is. Thank you for your incredible work and experience and wisdom in this area. My question is, I know that community is so important and relationships are so important for people of all ages, but especially as people of an older age are making just a harder journey, and how much community means to have by your side. And I know that there is data on aging as part of faith communities, whatever that faith may be, and that it helps give purpose and a commitment and a sense of security to know that people are with you on the journey. I wonder, in your studies and your experience, how could that relationship be even stronger? You know, what are the gaps, especially in this pandemic, where so many people have had to learn technology and find ways to stay connected when they've really literally physically had to be isolated? What are some gaps or big steps forward, or perhaps opportunities missed, or a hope that you've had and maybe haven't seen, as far as how a faith community can truly embrace, focus, respect, and really be the best partners on the journey that we can be?
So, Reverend Mason, thank you for your question. It's a really important question, one that is particularly relevant to me because I do locate myself within a faith community. At least in my community, one of the challenges is when people think about the Jewish future, they think about millennials and families with young children. They don't think about me as part of the Jewish future, but of course I am. I am a keeper of memory. I have wisdom, Jewish wisdom to share. You know, the lack of attention that funders and religious institutions pay to our age cohort is really a problem, and increases the sense of invisibility that many people who are deeply connected to their churches and synagogues feel, and in many cases, is a reason for them to leave. I mean, we are part of our communities, and we need to create the kinds of communities where we can flourish at every stage of our life, and where each generation can be part of the flourishing of other generations. So what are some specific things? There's a wonderful book by a apparently well-known pastor, Reverend, named Will Willimon, called Growing Old in Church. And he deals specifically with the Christian message and how it can be specifically applied to churches paying more attention to folks at this age stage. And I found the book very interesting. I mean, it really speaks from a Christian perspective, but was very interesting and I think helpful to all of us who are connected to religious communities. So one of the things that I think churches and synagogues can be doing is to have groups, study groups, to begin to think about what the issues are of this stage of our life. What we learned in the listening campaign, and what I've learned as I speak about this around the country, specifically in synagogues and in Jewish community centers, is that people really want to talk about what's happening. They want to talk about issues of meaning in their life. For Jews, and now more and more for Christians and Muslims as well, there's the tradition of writing an ethical will. First ethical will in the Bible, the story of Jacob, who gathers around him his sons and blesses them. It's a kind of ethical will, not leaving things, but leaving values. There was a tradition in Judaism from that period on that people would write an ethical will, the values that they want to leave behind to the people that come after them. In the rabbinic period, in the medieval period, some incredibly moving ethical wills during the Holocaust, and contemporary ethical wills as well. To create a group in the synagogue or in the church to help people write ethical wills. Incredibly powerful. And if you can't do it in a church or in a synagogue, where can you do it? The other thing, back to the issue of ritual, in Los Angeles, one of the major life transitions that is really very problematic is when it's time to give up the keys to the car. If you don't drive anymore, it's hard to get around. The public transportation leaves a lot to be desired. If synagogues or churches were to create a ritual, a public ritual, honoring people in the congregation who had the wisdom to know when it wasn't safe to drive anymore, and they were honored in some way, given the status of elder, some kind of way that the community acknowledges the difficulty of this choice, the loss that comes with it, but also the acknowledgement of what it means to be wise. If the church did this, if the synagogue did this, two things would happen. One is it might be easier for people to make that decision. But second, then the church or the synagogue is connected to figuring it out, right? If I am honored by my synagogue for the wisdom of knowing when it's not safe to drive anymore, then my synagogue has to help me figure out how I'm going to get to synagogue, right? What is the responsibility that churches and synagogues actually have and maybe have the resources to do to make it possible for the kind of transportation that we need, the kinds of services that the village offers. At Home on the Sound probably has a robust program of services being provided for each other.
So Thanksgiving and other holidays are just around the corner. Rabbi Geller, what advice can you provide to maximize positive intergenerational engagement when families are celebrating together over the holidays?
The issue of intergenerational connections, of co-generation, is really complicated. Sometimes it feels like we want those connections, but younger generations don't. This was exacerbated in the pandemic when there really seemed to be tension between younger generations and us. All that is real. But the other thing that's real is that, in a way, the pandemic created an intergenerational moment that maybe hadn't existed before. Millennial kids, families with young children, some of them moved back in with their parents. And for the first time since, the 1950s, we began to see real intergenerational households because it was important. And us folks got the benefit and the privilege and also the work connected to being involved in a very direct way with kids and grandkids. And kids and grandkids got the blessing of being connected to older adults. Now people are moving out again. How do we continue those connections? And what do you do if you don't have those connections in your own family? The other thing I think we did learn because of the pandemic was the ways families can stay together through technology. Lots of family gatherings, lots of holidays that were celebrated virtually, so that my kids in Boston or in Portland could be part of my Passover Seder, where they couldn't have been if it was here. Instead, it was on Zoom. So there are possibilities of kind of rekindling family connections with intentionality and really thinking about how to use technology. But there are other things as well about co-generational work. I said it briefly in my talk. The issue isn't that there should be co-generation. The issue is that working together, my experience, my talents, my history, and younger people or older people for that matter, who have different kinds of experience and talent, if we really work together, we could really make a difference in the world. And in working together, we would get to be friends with each other. And I think that's really important. And we all know that it's going to take the energy of my generation working with the energy of other generations in order to make a difference. So I think that's the beginning of a response.
The one area that I would love to know sort of how, and as a rabbi of 35 years here at Washburn Temple, that I have an inkling, especially as somebody who 7 years ago almost lost his wife of 33 years. And so loss is a primary challenge, and mourning and moving on, I think maybe the most formidable challenge we have. What are the tools that we can access as we get older, knowing loss is inevitable and the people we love most die, to be able to move on, to be able to integrate their memories with our lives and take their love with us? But what are those skills? Where do we get those resources, or how do we hone them? That is really, to me, a core foundational question.
Thank you, Rabbi SIRKMAN, for that really important question. When Rich and I wrote this book, we started writing the book before he got sick. I would have written more about being a solo ager if I knew that I would be in this situation. You never know, and you just kind of can't anticipate the changes that that happen in your life. One of the things that was really a blessing for me in terms of Richie's death is that because we were writing the book, and because the book began before he got sick, there was nothing that we hadn't talked about in terms of end-of-life issues, because that's what we were writing the book about. The book dealt with those kinds of issues. And so when the time came that he actually did get sick, we knew what he wanted, and we had talked to our kids about it, and so there was no conflict. And that's what made a death that happened way too soon still a good death. There were no unanswered questions, and there was nothing left that hadn't been clarified. So one of the tools is to recognize that you are going to lose people you love. Everybody we love is going to die at some point. And the extent to which we're aware of that, and that we don't pretend that we're immortal, that will help us in the work that we will need to do after a loss, of mourning and moving on. So I come from the same tradition that you do, the Jewish tradition, which offers very powerful rituals around mourning. I think all faith communities are particularly present at that moment of loss, the moment when we need community more than ever. And those tools are available to anybody who's part of a faith tradition. So what are some of the tools? I think that ritual really is one of those tools. I mentioned in my talk that for me, the moment of taking off my wedding ring was really important. I waited a year after the unveiling. I would not have survived the first year of Richie's death without the support of community, friends who were there for me, those times in the middle of the night when you call and say, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I mean, the friends who were there for me, I wanted to thank them. And I think I also wanted their blessing, sort of permission to move on. So again, about a month after the unveiling, I invited friends to my home, and I had created, with the help of some other friends, a ritual of taking off my wedding ring. And it consisted of some prayers, and I took off my wedding ring and gave that wedding ring and Rich's wedding ring to the people who had given the wedding rings to us at our wedding ceremony, our witnesses. And essentially, I thanked everybody for being there for me, and asked for their blessings. 2 people had scripted blessings. I had invited 2 people to actually speak out loud the blessings that they had for me. And then we went around the room and everybody offered me a one-word blessing. What I wish for Laura at this time in her life is, and just to hear friends speak those words was so empowering. And we did the ceremony within the context of the ritual called Havdalah, which of course you know, the ceremony that marks the end of Shabbat and the beginning of the rest of the week. Havdalah on Saturday night, you take the sweetness of the Sabbath and bring it with you into the week that's about to come. And so that was a metaphor, you know, the sweetness and the love and the connections of the years with Rich. Well, I was taking that with me as I moved on into the next stage of my life. It was really powerful and it was really helpful. And it, I think, really did enable me in some ways to move on. The other thing that I think a tool is to talk to other people who have lost people that they love. There are experts. We are experts. Actually, at Richie's Shiva, two older women of the congregation were there, and you know, I knew them and I cared for them, but I never really spent much time with them. But I had buried their husbands 10, 15 years ago, and they were models for me about how to continue a life without the person who had been your soulmate. And so I said to them, you know, I'm going to need you to teach me how to be a widow. And sometime after, we went out to dinner, and I met them at where they both live in the same condominium association. I met them, they were in their car, in the driver's seat and the passenger seat. And I got into the car behind the passenger seat. And the woman turns around and says to me, "Get out of the car and go sit behind the driver." So I was shocked. But I got out of the car and I sat behind the driver. And then she turned around and she said, "If you're sitting behind me, the passenger, I can't turn around and talk to you. And you don't want the driver to turn around and talk to you. So you have to sit in the opposite seat so that the passenger seat person can talk to you." So it just made me laugh. It was such a practical piece of advice. I am not the first person to have ever walked this path. And to the extent that I can talk to other people, share my experience and hear their experience, then I think I can move on. And the most important thing is to kind of trust our instincts and to share our experience.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Laura Geller and Simon Marlow. We hope you all enjoyed this evening's presentation. Join us next time when we present noted gerontologist Ronnie Lang. For complete information about our Getting Smarter About Getting Older program, visit us at www.athomeonthesound.org. Thank you.